She thought she knew exactly how their story would end. Whenever they argued, he came back. Whenever she walked away, he followed. Whenever she said, "Maybe we should be done," he treated those words like a challenge instead of a decision. For years, she believed that was proof of love. But one night, everything changed. There was no angry phone call. No desperate apology. No knock at her door. No message waiting on her screen. Just silence. At first, she was certain he was trying to teach her a lesson. Then she became annoyed. Then worried. Then she started checking her phone every few minutes. Days became weeks. And slowly, she began to understand something she had never wanted to admit. Maybe he hadn't stopped loving her. Maybe he had finally stopped forgetting himself just to keep her. And when they met again months later, she expected the same man, the man who would do anything to get her back. Instead, she found someone who still cared about her, but no longer needed her to choose him. And that was the moment she realized that sometimes, the person you expect to chase you forever eventually learns how to walk away. The restaurant had begun to empty by the time their conversation reached the point where neither of them knew what to say anymore. A few people remained at distant tables, speaking quietly beneath the soft music playing overhead. Outside the windows, headlights moved across the street, disappearing almost as quickly as they appeared. But inside their little corner of the room, everything seemed frozen. She stared across the table at him, waiting for some kind of reaction. She had expected him to become defensive, maybe frustrated, maybe even emotional. Instead, he simply sat there, looking tired. Not angry. Not cold. Just tired. "Are you seriously not going to say anything?" she finally asked. He looked up. "What do you want me to say?" That answer irritated her immediately. Anything would be better than this. "I'm listening." "No, you're waiting." He frowned. "Waiting for what?" "For me to finish talking so you can leave." He took a slow breath. "I'm not planning to leave." "You always say that." "Because I mean it." She folded her arms. "Then why have you been acting like you don't care?" He stared at her for a moment. "I never said I didn't care." "You don't have to say it." "I can feel it." There it was again, the sentence that had appeared in so many of their arguments. She could feel something changing. She could feel distance. She could feel that he wasn't as desperate to fix every disagreement as he once had been. And that frightened her more than she wanted to admit. "You're different," she said. "People change. That's convenient. It's not an excuse." "Then what is it?" He looked down at his hands. "I'm exhausted." The words landed harder than she expected. "From me?" she asked. "From everything." "That sounds like the same thing." "It isn't." She leaned forward. "You used to fight for us." He looked at her. "I still want us." "That's not what I asked." "Then tell me what you mean by fighting." She opened her mouth, but no answer came immediately. Because she knew what she meant. She wanted him to call after an argument. She wanted him to show up. She wanted him to reassure her that he wasn't going anywhere. She wanted him to make the fear disappear. "You know what I mean," she finally said. "Honestly, I don't." His voice wasn't sarcastic. That made it worse. "Whenever we had problems before, you would come after me. You'd apologize. You'd tell me we were going to be okay. You wouldn't let me just disappear." He nodded slowly. "I did. And now you don't." "Maybe because I finally realized something." She stared at him. "What?" "That every time you walked away, I thought my job was to convince you to come back." Her expression changed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I made a habit out of proving that I loved you." She shook her head. "You never had to prove anything." "Maybe not. But you kept asking." She looked away. "I needed reassurance." "I know." "Then why are you making it sound like I did something terrible?" "I'm not." It sounds like you are. He leaned back in his chair. I don't think you were trying to hurt me. Thank you. But I don't think you realized what it was doing to me either. The restaurant suddenly felt much quieter. She remembered all the arguments. The times she'd said they were finished because she wanted him to stop her. The times he'd called repeatedly. The times he'd apologized simply because losing her frightened him more than being right mattered. She had never thought about what happened on his side of those moments. She had only noticed that he always came back. So what? She asked. You're keeping score now. No, because it sounds like you're blaming me for everything. I'm not blaming you. Then what are you doing? He looked at her with a sadness she couldn't quite understand. I'm trying to tell you that I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Her heart dropped. She wanted him to take it back. She wanted him to panic. She wanted him to say that he didn't mean it. Instead, he stayed calm. Are you breaking up with me? She whispered. He looked toward the window before answering. I don't know if we're breaking up tonight. I just know I can't keep repeating the same cycle. She immediately felt defensive. So now I'm a cycle. No. We're a cycle. That distinction should have comforted her. Somehow it didn't. She reached for her phone, then stopped herself. Maybe you don't love me the way you used to. He shook his head. Maybe I love you differently now. That's not comforting. It isn't supposed to be. It's honest. She looked at him, waiting for the familiar rescue. She expected him to reach across the table and tell her everything would be okay. He didn't. And for the first time, she wondered whether this argument wasn't simply another argument. Maybe it was the beginning of an ending neither of them had planned. When she got home that night, she didn't turn on the lights. She dropped her keys onto the table, placed her phone beside them, and stood silently in the middle of the room. The conversation replayed inside her mind. His tired voice. His pauses. The way he had looked at her when she asked if he still loved her. She hated that expression more than anger. Anger meant he was still emotionally involved. Anger meant she could fight back. But sadness. Sadness made her feel as though he had already traveled somewhere she couldn't follow. She picked up her phone. Nothing. She put it down. 5 minutes later, she checked again. Still nothing. He'll text, she whispered. She had said those words countless times. Whenever they argued, there was always a predictable sequence. First came silence. Then irritation. Then one of them would reach out. Usually him. Sometimes with a simple message like, "Can we talk?" Sometimes with an apology. Sometimes with a joke designed to soften the tension. Somehow, they always found their way back. That history had become a kind of guarantee in her mind. Their relationship could bend, break, stretch, and become complicated, but it would never truly disappear. Because he always came back. She changed into comfortable clothes and sat on the edge of her bed. Her phone remained beside her. 10 minutes. 20. 40. She checked it again. No message. She opened their conversation and stared at the last thing he had written several hours earlier. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was simply ordinary. That somehow hurt more. She typed, "Are you really not going to call?" She stared at the sentence. Then deleted it. She typed again. "I thought you would at least check if I got home." Delete. "Are you seriously doing this?" Delete. Eventually, she put the phone face down. Her friend called later that evening. "How did it go?" she asked. "Bad." "Did he call?" "Not yet." Her friend paused. "Not yet. He always calls. Maybe he doesn't know what to say." She laughed bitterly. "He always knows what to say. Maybe this time is different." She immediately rejected the thought. "It's not." "How do you know?" "Because I know him." Her friend was quiet. "Do you?" The question irritated her. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing. I'm just asking. She didn't want questions. She wanted reassurance. She wanted someone to tell her that everything was normal and that he would eventually appear on her screen with the familiar apology. He's probably waiting for me to reach out, she said. Then why don't you? She didn't answer. Because reaching out first would mean surrendering the role she had always played. She wanted him to come back. She wanted proof. If she contacted him first, she feared she would never know whether he truly wanted her or whether she had simply pulled him back again. So she waited. The next morning, she woke up and checked her phone before she even sat up. Nothing. She checked again after breakfast. Nothing. At lunch, she looked again. Still nothing. By the third day, worry had replaced confidence. He's angry, she told herself. He needs time. By the fifth day, she began telling herself he was trying to make a point. He wants me to understand what it feels like. But underneath those explanations was a fear she refused to name. What if he wasn't waiting? What if he wasn't angry? What if he wasn't planning a dramatic return at all? A week passed. She finally called him. The call went unanswered. She stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Her heart sank. She tried again later. Still nothing. She sent a short message, "Can we talk?" No response. She wanted to be furious, but she couldn't. Because she remembered his words at the restaurant. I can't keep repeating the same cycle. Suddenly, his silence looked less like punishment and more like a boundary. That realization unsettled her. She called her friend again. He isn't answering. Maybe give him space. How much space? I don't know. He can't just disappear. You told him you wanted him to prove he cared. She went silent. Maybe this time, her friend continued gently, he's proving it differently. By doing nothing. Maybe by not chasing you when you ask him not to. She frowned. I never asked him not to chase me. Her friend sighed. You didn't have to. Every time you walked away, he learned that the only way to keep you was to run after you. That sentence stayed with her. For the first time, she considered that perhaps his silence wasn't about winning. Perhaps he wasn't trying to make her suffer. Perhaps he was simply refusing to participate in a game neither of them had realized they were playing. Still, she waited for the message. Because old habits don't disappear simply because reality changes. She kept checking. She kept hoping. And somewhere deep inside, she still believed he would eventually return. A few weeks later, she met her friend at a quiet cafe and finally told her everything. Not the polished version. Not the version where she was completely innocent and he was simply distant. She told her about the arguments, the dramatic exits, the phone calls, the apologies, and the strange relief she felt every time he came back. Her friend listened without interrupting. Can I ask you something? She said eventually. Sure. When you used to tell him you were done, did you actually want the relationship to end? No, then why did you say it? She looked down at her coffee. I wanted him to stop me. Why? Because if he stopped me, I knew he cared. Her friend nodded. So the breakup wasn't really the message. What was? The message was, please show me that I'm worth fighting for. She stared at her. Maybe. And did he show you? Every time. Then what happened? I felt better. For how long? She didn't answer. Her friend waited. A day, she finally admitted. Sometimes a week. And then? Then I'd worry again. That was the part she had never understood. The reassurance never lasted. No matter how many times he returned, no matter how many times he said he loved her, the fear eventually came back. Her friend leaned forward. Do you remember the last time you two broke up before this? Of course. What happened? I left. And? He came after me. How? He called. Then he came to my apartment. And what did you say? She smiled faintly. I told him he was too late. Were you serious? No, what did you want? I wanted him to try harder. Her friend looked at her carefully. And he did. Yes. Then you got back together. Yes. Did the original problem disappear? She hesitated. Not really. So what changed? We were okay again. For a while. Yes. Her friend nodded. That's the pattern. She didn't like hearing it described that way. Pattern sounded mechanical. Predictable. Almost meaningless. Their relationship had always felt passionate to her. Their arguments were intense because their feelings were intense. Their reconciliations felt powerful because they loved each other deeply. She had never considered that the intensity itself might be keeping them stuck. You're making it sound like we didn't love each other, she said. I'm not saying that. Then what are you saying? I'm saying love can be real and still become unhealthy when one person constantly has to prove it. She looked away. I never wanted him to suffer. I know. I just wanted to know he cared. He cared. Then what's wrong? Her friend answered softly. Eventually, you stopped asking him to love you and started asking him to prove that he couldn't live without you. She felt the words like a sudden weight in her chest. That's not fair. Maybe not. But think about it. She did. She thought about every time she had walked away expecting him to follow. Every time she had ignored his first call because she wanted him to make another. Every time she had accepted an apology without considering whether he was actually responsible. Every time she had felt reassured when he chased her, only to become anxious again weeks later. I never thought he'd actually stop, she whispered. Her friend nodded. That's the problem. What? You never thought there would be a last time. She stared at the table. That sentence frightened her. Because she realized it was true. Every time she had said, I'm done, she believed the relationship was protected by an invisible safety net. He would always come back. She could leave because she knew she wouldn't truly lose him. She could demand reassurance because she knew he would eventually provide it. But perhaps he had finally reached the point where the same safety net no longer existed. Do you think he's gone forever? She asked. Her friend didn't answer immediately. I think you need to stop making your healing depend on whether he comes back. That's not what I asked. I know. She swallowed. I just want to know. Maybe he'll come back. Maybe he won't. But if he does, you can't build the same relationship again. She looked up. Why? Because something has changed. What? He has learned that leaving doesn't always mean someone will chase you. The cafe suddenly felt very quiet. She understood then that his silence had forced her to confront something she had avoided for years. She had believed his willingness to return was evidence that she was deeply loved. But perhaps the deeper truth was more complicated. He had returned because he loved her, yes. But he had also returned because he was afraid. Afraid of losing her. Afraid that walking away meant giving up. Afraid that if he didn't fight hard enough, she would disappear forever. And maybe she had unknowingly depended on that fear. Maybe she had mistaken desperation for devotion. That night, she went home and looked at their old photographs. She saw smiles, vacations, birthdays, ordinary mornings, silly moments. The love had been real. She knew that. But now she was beginning to understand that love alone didn't automatically make every behavior healthy. Sometimes two people can love each other deeply and still teach each other the wrong lessons. And sometimes, the hardest lesson is learning that someone else's refusal to chase you isn't proof that they never cared. 3 months passed without a real conversation between them. At first, she counted the days. Then she stopped counting because the number itself became painful. Her life continued anyway. She went to work. She met friends. She laughed at things she didn't expect to find funny. She went grocery shopping, answered emails, cleaned her apartment, and slowly returned to routines that had nothing to do with him. But there were still moments when she reached for her phone automatically. A song would play in a store and remind her of a drive they once took together. A restaurant would appear on her social feed and she'd remember a night when they'd laughed until they couldn't breathe. Memories didn't disappear simply because communication did. She expected anger to remain, but something else gradually replaced it. Reflection. She began to understand that their relationship had never been as simple as she once believed. He hadn't been perfect. She hadn't been perfect. They had both made mistakes. He had become too willing to apologize just to end conflict. She had become too dependent on reassurance. He had sometimes avoided difficult conversations because he feared making things worse. She had sometimes created difficult conversations because she feared being forgotten. Neither of them had known how to break the cycle. And now there was no cycle because there was no relationship. One evening, she found an old message from him. It was from nearly 2 years earlier. He had written something simple after an argument: "I don't want us to go to sleep angry." She stared at the sentence for several minutes. At the time, she had loved it. It felt romantic. It felt like proof that he couldn't tolerate distance between them. Now she saw another side of it. He had been terrified of losing connection. She had learned to depend on that fear. "Maybe I confused being wanted with being pursued," she whispered. The thought became impossible to ignore. She started asking herself questions she had avoided. Did she want him, or did she want the certainty that he would always choose her? Did she miss him, or did she miss being reassured? If he returned exactly as he had been before, would she truly be happy? Or would she eventually create another test? The questions were uncomfortable, but they were honest. She also began to recognize something else: he had been changing long before the final argument. She had noticed his tiredness, but she interpreted it as disinterest. He had tried to communicate that he was overwhelmed, but she heard it as rejection. He had asked for calmer conversations, but she heard that as him becoming less passionate. Perhaps he hadn't suddenly stopped caring. Perhaps he had simply become tired of having to prove something that he had been demonstrating for years. One afternoon, she spoke to her friend again. "I think I understand now." Her friend smiled. "That's dangerous." She laughed. "What? You're about to say something emotionally intelligent. Don't ruin it." They both laughed. Then her expression became serious. "I think I made him responsible for my insecurity." Her friend didn't respond immediately. "That's a big realization." "I didn't mean to." "Most people don't." "But I did." "Maybe." She looked down. "I kept asking him to show me that he loved me, even though he had already shown me. And what did you think would happen if he stopped? I thought he'd finally prove that I mattered." Her friend gently shook her head. "Or maybe he would finally prove that he mattered to himself too." She felt tears gather in her eyes. That sentence broke something open inside her. She had spent months wondering why he hadn't come back. She had wondered whether he had forgotten her. Whether he had met someone else. Whether he had decided that their relationship wasn't worth saving. But she had rarely wondered what it had cost him to keep coming back before. Maybe walking away wasn't a sign that his love had disappeared. Maybe it was the first time he had allowed himself to admit that love shouldn't require him to repeatedly abandon his own needs. That night, she wrote him a message. "I hope you're okay. I've been thinking a lot." She stared at it. Her thumb hovered over send. Then she deleted it. Not because she didn't care. Because for the first time, she understood that reaching out wasn't automatically the mature thing to do. She didn't want to contact him simply because she was lonely. She didn't want to pull him back into the same emotional cycle without knowing what she could offer differently. If she ever spoke to him again, she wanted it to be because she had something honest to say. Not because she needed him to reassure her. 3 months earlier, she had believed silence meant he didn't care. Now she was beginning to understand that sometimes silence means someone is finally learning how to listen to themselves. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. There was no dramatic plan. No carefully arranged meeting. No message saying, "We need to talk." She was leaving a small bookstore when she saw him across the street. For a moment, she wasn't sure it was actually him. He looked familiar, but different. Maybe it was simply because she hadn't seen him in months. He was standing outside a coffee shop, holding a cup in one hand while looking at something on his phone. Then he looked up. Their eyes met. Everything inside her went quiet. He noticed her too. Neither moved for several seconds. Then he gave a small, uncertain smile. She returned it. He crossed the street. "Hi." Her voice was softer than she expected. "Hi. I wasn't expecting to see you." "Neither was I." They stood there, both suddenly aware of how strange it was to speak after so much silence. She wanted to ask 100 questions. Did he miss her? Was he seeing someone? Had he thought about calling? Was he happier? Had he ever regretted leaving? But none of those questions seemed right. Instead, she said, "How have you been?" "Better." The answer was honest. She noticed that immediately. He didn't say it to make her jealous. He didn't say it to hurt her. He simply answered. "Better," she repeated. "Yeah." It took time. She nodded. "Can we talk?" He hesitated. "Sure." They walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "I owe you an apology." He looked at her. "You don't have to." "I do." "You don't have to apologize for having feelings." "I'm not apologizing for my feelings. I'm apologizing for what I made you do with them." He remained quiet. She continued. "I've spent the last few months thinking about everything. And I realized something I didn't understand before." "What?" "I kept asking you to prove that you loved me." He looked down. "You weren't the only one responsible." "Maybe. But I made it a requirement." She took a breath. "Whenever I was afraid, I made you chase me. Whenever I felt insecure, I created situations where you had to prove you'd stay. And whenever you came back, I felt safe again." He looked at her with an expression that wasn't anger anymore. It was sadness mixed with understanding. "I knew you were scared. I know. I just didn't know how to help. I know that now." She looked toward the trees. "What I didn't understand was that you were becoming scared too." He nodded slowly. "I was. Of me leaving. At first. And later." He took a breath. "Of losing myself." She closed her eyes briefly. Those words hurt, but they also made sense. "I never wanted that." "I know. Then why didn't you tell me?" He smiled sadly. "I tried." She looked at him. "When?" "More times than you remember." She knew he was right. She remembered the conversations now. The times he'd said he couldn't keep having the same argument. The times he'd asked them to stop using separation as a threat. The times he'd said he wanted them to solve problems without one person having to prove something to the other. She had heard the words. She simply hadn't understood their importance. "Why didn't you come back?" she asked. The question finally came out. He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I almost did." Her heart jumped. "What?" "A lot." He looked toward the road. "There were nights I wanted to call. I wrote messages and deleted them. I drove past places we'd been together and thought about stopping by. I missed you." She swallowed. "Then why?" "Because I knew what would happen." "You don't know that." "I know us." She looked away. He continued. "If I came back because I missed you, we'd feel better for a while. We'd promise to communicate better. We'd be happy. Then eventually you'd get scared again, I'd get tired again, and would repeat everything. Maybe we could have changed. Maybe. Then why didn't you give us that chance?" He looked directly at her. "Because I finally realized I couldn't change the relationship by myself." She felt tears forming. I could have changed too. I know. I wish you'd waited. I did. She stared at him. For a long time. He paused. But waiting isn't the same as living. She looked down at her hands. That sentence stayed between them. She realized that while she had been waiting for him to return, he had been learning how to continue his life without her. Not because she meant nothing. Because he had finally understood that loving someone didn't mean putting your entire life on hold until they were ready to choose you again. Do you hate me? She asked. He almost laughed. No, are you angry? Not anymore. Then what do you feel? He looked at her with genuine warmth. I care about you. Her heart tightened. That's all. No. But that's what I can give you honestly. For once, she didn't ask him to prove it. They remained on that bench longer than either of them planned. The conversation moved slowly, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. She asked about his life. He told her about work, friends, the projects he'd started, the things he'd learned while being alone. He asked about hers too. She told him that she had been trying to become more comfortable with uncertainty. She had started noticing how quickly her mind jumped to the worst possible conclusion whenever someone became distant. She had learned that not every quiet moment meant rejection. Not every delayed message meant abandonment. Not every disagreement meant the relationship was about to disappear. He listened carefully. You seem different, he said. She smiled faintly. You said that to me once. I remember. I hated hearing it. I know. Now I think I understand what you meant. He nodded. I wasn't trying to punish you. I know. There was a pause. Then she asked the question she had been afraid to ask. Did you ever stop loving me? He didn't answer immediately. She watched his face. I don't think love works like a light switch, he finally said. You don't just turn it off because something ends. So you still loved me? For a while, yes. Her eyes filled. And now? He looked at her. Now I care about what we were. She swallowed. That's different. It is. Does that mean there's no chance? He sighed. I don't know if I should call it a chance. She looked confused. What do you mean? If we ever considered being together again, it couldn't be because we missed the old version of us. Why not? Because the old version is what brought us here. She didn't argue. He continued. We can't rebuild something using the same habits that destroyed it. She nodded slowly. Then what would have to change? Everything we thought love was supposed to look like. Meaning. I don't want a relationship where one person has to leave to get reassurance and the other person has to chase them to provide it. She looked down. Neither do I. I want disagreements where we can stay in the room. Okay. I want you to be able to tell me you're scared without making me responsible for removing the fear. She nodded. And I want you to be able to tell me you're tired without me assuming you're tired of me. That's fair. I want us to be two people choosing each other. Not two people constantly testing whether the other person will choose us. Her eyes filled again. I wish we'd understood that before. Me too. She wiped her cheek. Do you think we could do it now? He looked at her. The question wasn't manipulative. She wasn't trying to make him prove anything. She genuinely wanted to know. I don't know, he said. She nodded. That's honest. I don't want to promise something I can't guarantee. I understand. And I don't want you to think that because I'm talking to you, we're automatically getting back together. I won't. He studied her expression. You're not angry. A little. He smiled. That's fair. She laughed softly through her tears. I think the old me would have walked away right now. Why? Because you didn't give me the answer I wanted. And what would the old you have wanted? She looked at him. You to say yes immediately. And the new you? She thought for a moment. The new me wants the truth, even if it hurts. He nodded. That's a good start. She smiled. Don't sound so proud. I'm allowed. They both laughed. It was the first genuine laugh they had shared in months. But the laughter didn't erase the past. It simply made the present feel less painful. Before they left, she asked one final question. If we never become a couple again, will you regret loving me? He shook his head. No, why? Because loving you taught me things I needed to learn. She looked at him. Even the painful parts. Especially those. She smiled sadly. I used to think if you walked away, it meant our love wasn't strong enough. And now? She looked at the road ahead. Now I think sometimes people walk away because they finally understand what love should not cost them. He nodded. That's something I learned too. They stood. For a second, neither knew whether a hug would be appropriate. Then she opened her arms. He accepted. It wasn't the desperate embrace of two people trying to prevent an ending. It was simply two people acknowledging that something important had existed between them. When they separated, she looked at him. Take care of yourself. You too. She walked away first. And this time, she didn't look back to see whether he was following. The weeks after their meeting were strange because she no longer had a simple answer to what they were. They weren't together. They weren't enemies. They weren't strangers either. They occasionally exchanged messages, but there was no constant emotional negotiation. No deliberate delays. No hidden tests. No expectation that one person should prove something before the other responded. It was uncomfortable at first. She had become used to measuring affection through reactions. If he responded quickly, she felt secure. If he took longer, she worried. If he called first, she felt important. If she had to initiate, she wondered whether he cared less. Now she was trying to step outside that entire system. One evening, she found herself staring at her phone after he hadn't responded to a message for several hours. The old anxiety appeared instantly. Her mind began producing explanations. Maybe he was losing interest. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe he was talking to someone else. Maybe she had said something wrong. She almost sent another message. Then she stopped. She put the phone down and asked herself a question she had never asked before: do I actually have evidence that something is wrong? The answer was no. She took a breath. She continued with her evening. Later, he responded normally, explaining that he'd been busy. Nothing dramatic happened. No argument. No reassurance marathon. No emotional confrontation. She realized how much energy she had once spent fighting imaginary battles. Another time, they met for coffee. He told her about a difficult week at work. She listened without trying to solve everything. When she began talking about something that had hurt her feelings, he didn't become defensive. They simply talked. It wasn't perfect. They disagreed. But neither threatened to leave. That difference felt enormous. This is weird, she said. He smiled. What is? We're having a disagreement and nobody is ending the relationship. He laughed. Progress. Don't get too excited. I'm trying. She smiled. The more they talked, the more she understood that the relationship they once had been built around fear. Her fear of being abandoned. His fear of being rejected. Her solution had been to test his devotion. His solution had been to chase her. Both strategies temporarily reduced fear, but neither created security. They had mistaken emotional intensity for emotional safety. Now they were learning something quieter. Trust. Trust wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive with a desperate midnight phone call. It didn't require someone to beg another person to stay. Trust looked like believing that a delayed message wasn't automatically rejection. It looked like saying, I need some time, without turning that request into punishment. It looked like being able to disagree and still believe the relationship could survive. One afternoon, she finally told him, I think I understand why your silence hurt so much. He looked at her. Why? Because I thought if you didn't chase me, it meant you didn't love me. He waited. And now? Now I think I was using your fear of losing me as evidence that I mattered. He looked down for a second. That's honest. It isn't flattering. It doesn't have to be. She smiled. I used to think love meant someone couldn't bear to lose you. And now? Maybe love means someone chooses you without being forced to fear losing you. He nodded. That's closer. She looked at him. Do you still think about what happened? Sometimes. Do you wish you'd done something differently? He thought. I wish I'd spoken more clearly before I reached my limit. I wish I'd listened before you reached yours. Neither tried to assign blame. That was another new thing. They were finally capable of acknowledging mistakes without turning them into weapons. She didn't know whether this would eventually become a new relationship. Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't. But she knew something had changed inside her. She no longer wanted to be chased. She wanted to be understood. She no longer wanted someone to prove they couldn't live without her. She wanted someone who could live independently and still choose to share life with her. And she realized that was a much stronger form of love. Because desperation can make someone stay. Fear can make someone return. Guilt can make someone apologize. But none of those things can create a healthy partnership. Choice can. Respect can. Communication can. And sometimes, the most loving thing two people can do is stop asking each other to prove their feelings and start learning how to trust them. Several months later, they met one final time to decide what their future would actually look like. It wasn't dramatic. There were no accusations, no tears at the beginning, no angry speeches. They sat across from each other in the same kind of quiet place where people could talk without being interrupted. She looked at him and smiled. This feels strange. Why? Because I used to think we'd have a conversation like this with one of us threatening to leave. He laughed. We grew up a little. A little. They both smiled. Then she became serious. I want to ask you something. Okay. If we started again, would you be afraid? He thought about it. Yes. She nodded. Me too. But being afraid isn't necessarily the problem. What's the problem? Pretending we're not afraid and making each other responsible for fixing it. She smiled. That's probably the smartest thing you've ever said. I'm going to remember that compliment. She laughed. Then she looked down at her hands. I don't want the old relationship back. His expression softened. Neither do I. I miss parts of it. So do I. But I don't miss the constant uncertainty. Me neither. I don't want to threaten goodbye just because I'm scared. And I don't want to apologize just because I'm afraid you'll leave. She looked at him. Then maybe we could try. He didn't answer immediately. That pause would once have terrified her. In the past, she would have filled it with assumptions. She would have asked whether he still cared. She would have demanded an answer. This time, she waited. He finally said, I think we could. Her heart beat faster. But slowly. She smiled. Slowly is okay. And honestly. Yes. No tests. No tests. No disappearing to get a reaction. Agreed. No chasing someone who has clearly asked for space. She nodded. Agreed. He smiled. That's a lot of rules. They are not rules. She laughed. What are they? Promises to communicate. She considered that. I like that better. He reached across the table, and she placed her hand in his. It wasn't the grand reunion she once imagined. There was no dramatic declaration. No promise that they would never hurt each other again. No guarantee that everything would be perfect from that day forward. Instead, there was something more realistic. Two people acknowledging that love alone hadn't been enough before. They needed boundaries. They needed honesty. They needed patience. They needed to stop turning fear into tests. She squeezed his hand. Can I tell you something? Sure. The first few weeks after you stopped coming back were awful. He nodded. I know. I thought you were punishing me. I wasn't. I know that now. She looked at him. Then I thought you had stopped caring. I didn't. And eventually I realized something. What? You didn't stop caring. You stopped abandoning yourself. He looked at her quietly. That was probably the hardest thing I've ever understood about us. She continued. I thought your willingness to chase me proved I was loved. But sometimes you were just afraid to lose me. He nodded. And I thought your fear meant I had to keep proving myself. She smiled sadly. We were both trying to feel safe in ways that made the other person feel unsafe. Exactly. She looked out the window. I wish we'd known that earlier. Maybe we weren't ready to understand it earlier. Maybe. They sat quietly. Then she asked, do you think we're going to make it this time? He smiled. I think we have a better chance because we're not treating staying together like the only possible proof that we love each other. She looked confused. Explain. If we're together because we're terrified of losing each other, we'll eventually hurt each other to feel secure. If we're together because we genuinely choose each other, then we can actually build something. She smiled. That sounds fair. And if someday we realize we can't make it work? Her expression became serious. Then we tell the truth. And we don't threaten it before then. Never. He squeezed her hand. Deal. When they left the cafe, she noticed something unexpected. She wasn't afraid. Not because she knew the future. Not because she had received a guarantee that he would never leave. She wasn't afraid because she had finally learned that love wasn't supposed to be a prison built from fear. A person could love you and still have boundaries. A person could miss you and still choose not to return. A person could care deeply and still understand that losing themselves wasn't the price of staying together. And she could love someone without constantly asking them to prove it. Their story didn't become perfect after that day. They still had disagreements. They still had difficult conversations. They still had moments of insecurity. But they stopped treating those moments as evidence that love was failing. They learned to talk instead of test. They learned to listen instead of assume. They learned that sometimes reassurance is healthy, but constant proof is exhausting. And most importantly, she finally understood the lesson that had taken her years to learn. If someone has to repeatedly chase you just to convince you that you matter, eventually they may realize that love should never require either person to lose themselves. He had once been the man she expected to come running every time she walked away. She had once believed that his return was the greatest proof of his love. But when he finally stopped coming back, she discovered something far more valuable than being chased. She discovered the difference between being wanted and being chosen. And this time, when they chose each other, neither of them had to run.